Our Brandon Marcello brings us his latest college football power rankings. SMU, the biggest mover up as they move up 6 spots with a big win. Meanwhile, Clemson falls 13 spots after being upset by Louisville over the weekend. Meanwhile, Oregon with a huge win at the Big House as they stay in that top spot, followed by Ohio State and Georgia also picking up big wins. How about the U? Another thriller that went down to the wire. But Cam Ward has the Canes rolling right now. Penn State clinging to the top 10 after that heartbreaking loss to the Buckeyes. Indiana outside the top 5. So let's get to the maker of the list as we welcome in Brandon Marcello, as well as our Danny Cannell, college football analyst, to discuss. Brandon, I want to start with Indiana because they're undefeated still. They're just outside that top 5, and it kind of looked like things were going to change in that game against Michigan State early. They were able to score 47 points. What has been so impressive to you about what Indiana's done this season?
Yeah, they're just beating everybody's brains out. That's what's been impressive. It doesn't matter who. They're beating everybody by 14 points or more. They got down 10-0. We thought they were playing with their food a little bit, then scored 47 straight against Michigan State on the road. Impressive. But what's keeping me from keeping them in the top 5 right now is just their strength of record. And by that, I mean the record of the teams they played so far. The combined record is 34-45. It's by far the worst record of opponents in the top 15 in my power rankings right now. So that's holding them back a little bit. The good news, obviously, for Indiana is they got some marquee games coming up. A quote-unquote blue blood in Michigan, which isn't doing too well, but an opportunity to get on the national stage and get more attention. And, of course, Ohio State coming up. But right now, Indiana just hovering right outside the top 5 because of that strength of record.
I'm going to hold you to that, Brandon. If they get the best of Michigan, which the odds makers, that's to me, is the odds makers are starting to notice how good this team, Indiana team is, Haley. They're a 14-point favorite against Michigan, and Michigan just played Oregon, was a 14.5-point underdog. So I get there's a home and away, but that's usually worth 3 extra points. So the odds makers are putting Indiana in the same vicinity at Oregon, which is a huge sign of respect. Unfortunately, in a lot of rankings and a lot of power rankings, they're just not getting it where they deserve, and I think they do deserve it because, as Brandon mentioned, they have been absolutely boat racing their opponents, dominating from start to finish, and they've had all kind of adversity that they've had to deal with throughout the season, whether it was people doubting them, whether it was Curtis Rourke being gone for a couple of weeks to get his thumb operated on him. And Haley, I did a beautiful demo showing the problems that could arise from holding a football with a broken thumb that has 2 pins stuck in it. All he did was go out there and throw for 4 touchdown passes and 0 interceptions and was close to flawless. I think the only reason they're not in everybody's top 5 is because they're not the Ohio State Buckeyes or they don't wear the maize and blue. It is a branding thing, but they are playing as good as anybody in the country. They're dominating from start to finish. I think they deserve to be in the top 3.
They are 9-0, their best start ever in program history. So we're going to keep you honest, Brandon, as this season rolls on for the Hoosiers. To that point, though, Danny, I'm calling them your BYU Cougars because for this exact reason, just the parity we've seen in college football, some of these smaller teams have had an opportunity to step up and say we belong in the college football playoff. Brandon has them at number 11 here on his list, but BYU specifically here, they're top of the conference right now. What more do they have to do to sort of prove that they belong in this conversation?
Keep winning. I mean, they really do. And they're different to me than Indiana because they haven't been quite as dominant. There have been some games, Oklahoma State comes to mind, it comes down to the wire, where they just don't dominate as much. But then you start tallying up their wins, and they do have some impressive wins. One of those being an SMU squad from the ACC, who they beat earlier this season, that all of a sudden that's, looking like a really good win against a top 15 ball club. But they are controlling their own destiny, and that's most important. That's what every team dreams of, is to be able to know exactly what you have ahead of you, and you have to win every single week. I'm not quite as confident in BYU, but it's probably more so to do with the Big 12 and what is the most evenly matched conference out there among the Power 4. And they have a road game against Utah this weekend, and I know Utah's not very good, but it's like, I hope BYU takes care of a rivalry in Salt Lake City on the road. I think they win, but I don't have as much confidence in BYU. But I love the story of Jake Retzlaff, who's been awesome at quarterback for them. Kalani Sitake, definitely, if there was a comeback coach of the year, it would be him that would be up for it. They have been really, really good.
Yeah, BYU at this point, a lot like Indiana, strength of record's pretty bad. They actually got the second worst behind Indiana with a combined record of 34-38. They've been buoyed by that impressive win at SMU in week 2. that was really, really helping them up in these rankings right now. But there was 2 teams in the Big 12 that didn't get to play this week that actually were very happy for not playing, and that's Colorado and BYU. They get to stay at the top of the rankings, BYU. Colorado gets to move up in the rankings, so to speak, with the losses by Iowa State this week and obviously Kansas State. But BYU, we need a better resume here. You look at the remaining schedule, very conducive for them to obviously make the Big 12 championship game. And it's crazy to say this, but their toughest games remaining are probably Arizona State, which is making a run right now, and even Houston, which has been playing a lot better the last 3 weeks and just upset Kansas State.
Definitely something to keep our eye on there. And if we continue the conversations about the smaller schools, this next one pains me. As a UNT grad, it bothers me that SMU is so good at football right now, but they are. They're number 13. You mentioned it, Brandon, your biggest movers this week, moving up. And now they have a real chance to play for an ACC title, which a lot of us here at CBS knew that they would be a dark horse coming into this season. But what were we seeing in the preseason, Brandon, out of SMU that sort of propelled them to this point in the season and as they continue that momentum going forward?
It's an absolutely incredible story. Because of the transfer portal, they were able to build their offensive and defensive lines up in short order to contend in the ACC. They added 13 offensive and defensive linemen, and not just linemen, but they got power conference experience. Every single one of those players have played in a Power 5 conference in the previous years. Now they're building up depth, and they've had to deal with injuries, but they've been able to slide guys in among those transfers to really contend in the ACC. The transfer portal was a big-time boost for SMU in preparing for the ACC, and it's incredible this story they're on. Kevin Jennings, of course, been a big boost for them at quarterback. Really has changed that offense since he came in after that BYU loss and replaced Preston Stone as the starter. The running game gets going for them, and opponents have had a very hard time slowing them down, and it's opened things up down the field in the passing game. But the very big key here for SMU down the stretch is that defensive line. Again, the transfer portal, they've been able to rebuild there and build some depth. They are one of the top rush defenses in the entire country, a very real contender in the ACC, and a team I can guarantee you no one would want to face in the playoff.
Yeah, Brandon, I totally agree. Now, I was a doubter that they could come in year one. I thought in 2 or 3 years they'd be able to compete. But last year in the American, they did play 3 Power 4 schools, and they lost all 3 games, and they weren't real competitive in those games. So I was a little bit more of a skeptic, but they have quickly won me over with the way they've been playing football. And you have to give a ton of credit to Rhett Lashley for making a difficult decision to sit Preston Stone, who was their starter all season last year, and to go to Kevin Jennings after that BYU game, which is their only loss. And again, it was with the previous quarterback. So the committee can take some of those things into consideration when they look at a team being different when they make that change. And so that loss was only by 3 points. Their win against Louisville all of a sudden looks a lot better. They've been blowing out opponents. The game against Duke is probably the one hiccup they had where they turned it over 6 times, but they still found a way to win. And then most impressive win of the season was dominating Pitt from start to finish. In that game, the score wasn't even indicative of the reality because Pitt scored a couple touchdowns late to at least make the score look respectable. So I think SMU, I am with you. It looks like it looks like SMU and Miami are on this beeline to meet in the ACC championship game. I think that is going to be a fun, wild game that I would not be surprised if SMU has Miami on the ropes.
Yeah, and especially when you think about how Miami has been playing games lately. They've had, 4 come down to the wire, including that game against Duke. It hurts me, but pony up for SMU. Our Brandon Marcello and Danny Cannell breaking down the latest college football power rankings as we continue to tick through this college football season.